Okay, so there's one last thing that we use to graph functions that we're going to talk about, and that is reflection. Now we're only going to focus on the vertical version of it. There actually is a horizontal reflection. If you, when you go on to the next course, you may eventually talk about the horizontal reflections. They're a little more complicated, and so we're going to actually avoid those. Basically, when we talk about a vertical reflection, we're talking about the function having a negative sign applied outside of it. Remember, vertical is outside. So negative f of x. As an example, consider f of x equals negative x squared. What's going to happen is that negative sign is going to cause the graph to flip upside down. And think about that. X squared is normally going to always be positive, but when you put a negative sign in front, the values are always going to be negative. So what you would do to graph that is you would take and draw your graph and take the x squared graph, the U-shaped graph, and just turn it upside down about the x-axis. In other words, flip it vertically. As another example, consider negative 1 over x. The 1 over x is the one that probably gives people the most trouble when it has a reflection. But basically it's just going to flip-flop. Normally it's starting out underneath the x-axis, so it's actually going to be above the x-axis, and then later it's above the x-axis, so that'll flip so that it's now below the x-axis. And let's just look at a couple of examples of dealing with this reflecting along with our vertical and horizontal changes. So let's consider the function f of x equals 4 minus the absolute value of x. You may prefer to write that so that the absolute value is first, and we can see that it has a negative sign applied to it, and that the 4 actually has a plus sign with it. So it's negative absolute value plus 4, and then we decode what kind of graph we have. It's an absolute value graph. The negative sign is going to cause us to flip vertically. And then the plus 4 is outside, so that's a vertical change as well. That's going to cause the graph to move up 4. Okay, so then we go ahead and we draw our graph in. So everything's ready, and now we're going to take our V-shaped graph, but it's been flipped upside down, so instead of a V, it's going to kind of be a pointy N, if you will. And it would look something like that. And so that would be the graph of 4 minus absolute value of x, or negative absolute value of x plus 4. It's been flipped upside down, and it's still been moved up 4 units. And then the last one involves the 1 over x graph. Again, this is when you're flipping them, probably the one that gives people the most trouble. So again, we start to decode what we have. It's a 1 over x graph. First thing we spot is the negative sign. Remember, the negative sign is going to cause it to flip. And because we're only doing flipping vertically, we can just say flip. And then we examine what else we have. We have plus 2 on the inside of the function. Remember, inside's horizontal, horizontal's backwards. So plus 2 is going to cause the graph to move to the left 2. And then we see we have a plus 3 on the outside. Outside's vertical, and it's the normal way. So we'll move the graph up 3 units. We then go ahead and draw in our axes, making our horizontal and vertical changes. Now remember, with the 1 over x graph, we don't actually have 0, 0 as a point, so we use those new values of negative 2 and 3 to draw in our new horizontal and vertical lines to guide the graph. And then the last thing that we do is we draw in our graph. Now 1 over x, it normally starts out underneath, but because of the negative, it's been flipped, so it'll actually begin above. And so we'll draw it in like that using those horizontal and vertical lines as guides. And then finally, it would normally be above, but because of the negative, it'll be underneath. And so we'd draw that in. And so our graph would look something like that. Okay, so hopefully this will help you out as you're getting into these problems with graphing functions.